the style that he delivers a speech is really interesting. It's notable, and it's just clean, in my opinion. I mean, obviously, someone like him that's been in the media a lot, a little bit more of a natural presence there. But let's talk about the substance of the speech, okay? Leading off with the tax cuts, talking about the emphasis and the importance of pro-family. And then, I mean, look, we posted this in the title. Is this the most pro-family, pro-life speech or State of the Union speech ever by a president? I'll get into some of those details. But the lead-in really was about the jobs and the economy. Boy, and it's strong. 7 million new jobs created under the president. Lowest unemployment rate in half a century, according to the Trump administration. The lowest unemployment rate of during any administration as far as presidential in the history of the United States. African American unemployment rate is lowest ever. The veteran unemployment rate is at its lowest ever. And this was a key statistic he brought out. 70% of the new jobs in those 7 million jobs, I guess that was part of that number, are held by women. I mean, just really some interesting stats pulled out. And 10 million people off of welfare. I mean, look, and when the economy is doing well, when people individually are doing well economically, that does have an impact on a lot of other things, people's individual lives, hiring more people, jobs, all that stuff, education. It really just has a tremendous effect. But then, you know, as you got later into the speech, he talked about issues related to border security and things of that nature. But as it relates to issues that Texas values and many of our supporters care about, really some notable things in the second half or towards the last third of the speech. Just a really important section where he emphasized the First Amendment, starting out with, we protect the constitutional right to pray in public schools. You know, in state Texas, we have laws that protect the individual rights of students to pray in our public schools, but it's kind of tricky sometimes how that's dealt with. So a lot of people aren't aware of that, and there's really this overall sense that if you're a student, you can't pray in public schools. As a matter of fact, a lot of government officials think that still, even though we've got state laws on the books, we've had Supreme Court decisions. So very important to hear the president emphasize this. And this is a speech that gets about really the most attention in 1 year than any other speech as far as across the country and the world for that matter. And so that would, you know, likely help kind of push back against this, you know, talking point we've heard for so long that students aren't allowed to pray in public schools, a lot of times pushed by people that are opponents of the First Amendment. But then he went on to say, in America, we don't punish prayer. Because there are a lot of people out there that are trying to do that. You know, if you look at the work we do and you hear about the work we do, you know that it's all too common, unfortunately. And then he went on to focus on a Supreme Court decision that one of our board members, Kelly Shackelford, led, and he talked about we don't tear down crosses. There was a very important war memorial cross that was up in the northeast part of the country that went up to the U.S. Supreme Court. That was a victorious case. That cross is going to stay up, but there's still a lot of efforts by others to tear crosses down. Then he went on to go to say, we don't ban symbols of faith. We don't muzzle preachers and pastors. In America, we celebrate faith, and I continue to try to quote his words specifically. We cherish religion, we lift our voices in prayer, and we raise our sights to the glory of God. These are the words of our president. All right. And, you know, and it's really, look, it's refreshing to us. And we've seen a lot of this in some of the meetings and some of the work. We know that the president put out some things making it clear where the federal administration stands on these type of issues related to religious liberty. He had a very important event in the Oval Office that Texas Values Board member Kelly Shackelford was a part of. And so it's not a surprise that he's messaging on it, but when it's focused on in the State of the Union speech, it just really is encouraging because we know how particular and how tight that speech can be. And, you know, they're very careful and strategic. I don't want to say strategic, but, you know, there's not a lot of things, not everything gets talked about that we know the president and the American people care about. And so the fact that that's included is just more evidence of how important it is to this administration and really how important it is to Americans. And so it's great to see him really go into a lot of detail there. And wow, what you know, an emotional and a very personal moment when he talked about Ellie Schneider and this young baby, this young girl that was there with her mother, Robin, who was born at 21 weeks and 6 days, now 2 years old. She was there with her mother. And he segued in, but talking about that, about really the advancements of technology and how babies are being born at such an early level. We know how important that is because some people don't want those babies to survive. There's an attack on babies in the womb. We know that. And then some people don't even want babies to be protected when they're born alive. And so the president used that as an opportunity to then talk about legislation that he's supporting, banning late-term abortions of babies. I mean, 21 weeks is, you're talking about really kind of half of that time period, right? I mean, it's 21 weeks is not really all that late term at this point when you hear about that phrase and that term being used. But we know here in the state of Texas, we have a law, a state law, the Born Alive and Protection Act, that was passed last session. And we know there's some tremendous testimony on that because of just this notion from other states like New York and Virginia that were messaging that it would be okay to end the life of a child that survived an abortion attempt and was born alive. And then he went on to say, and these were his words, every human life is a sacred gift from God. And so that key phrase there, right? I mean, just to really connect the God side, the faith side into the life issue. We know how common it is for that connection to be that people that are pro-life support religious liberty issues. And then he went on to talk about, look, you hear a lot of people talk about this, that, and I don't believe this, but the suggestion that pro-life people only care about the baby in the womb. They don't really care about what happens after the baby is born. If you're in the pro-life movement, you know that's not true because of a lot of the work that people do to support the children and women and fathers, their families afterwards. But Trump used that as a connection to say, we've also got this new effort, this new law in place, the paid family leave that is for mothers and fathers. And so really just comprehensive messaging on how important the family is, how important life is, and recognizing how those things are connected, but also recognizing how faith is a key part of that. And look, important speech when it relates to these issues. And I want to touch on what it means for Texas. As we go into we're right in the middle of this election cycle. It's important for people to know the religious liberty protections that are there for pastors and churches. We've got a great handout called Churches and Elections. Because you may get questions about the president's speech. Can you talk about the president's speech from the pulpit? Absolutely. I mean, this is a speech that has national relevance, it has community relevance. You don't have to think of it as a political issue. And he talked a lot about issues of morality. But it's important as it relates to elections because we want to encourage pastors and churches to know you've got the legal right to tell people that there's an election coming up. An important election. This is a presidential year, so you've got maybe a longer ballot in some ways, or elections are going to get a lot more attention. And so don't shy away from that. And so we are engaging in a church and pastor outreach project this year, more robust than we've ever done. We want to walk alongside you. If you could invite us to come out, or you want to go to our website, or you want to call us to get this one pager, we've got other resources available as well. And it talks about that. Churches may not endorse or oppose a particular candidate or contribute church resources to a political campaign. But here's what they can do. Can they register their voters? Absolutely. Their members as voters. Can they pass out nonpartisan voters guides? Absolutely they can. Can they invite all candidates to speak on a particular race? Yes. Can they speak directly about specific issues and legislation? You want to talk about some of the legislation that the president talked about last night at the State of the Union, particularly as it relates to life and religious liberty? That in no way jeopardizes your 501c3 status or your nonprofit status as a church. And individually, a pastor can do whatever the pastor wants to do. And so as a lawyer myself, I've worked on some of these issues. Our friends at First Liberty have as well. If there's anything we can do to support you on these, we want to do that. And so we're looking for opportunities to come to churches, to talk about these issues, to equip you, to give you this information. And as we get closer to a primary date, a couple of election dates coming up. February 18th, early voting starts in the state of Texas. And the president is on the primary, so a lot of other people as well. So that'll be all the way down the ballot. The primary election, main election day, is March 3rd, but there are 2 weeks of early voting leading up to that date. We've seen a trend where a lot more people are early voting. But there's a stat out there that in 2016, the last time we had a presidential election, that 42% of Christians stayed home. They didn't even go to the ballot box. But this is the primary. The big election day is in November, but don't think about the primary as not being important. So if you go to a church, you want to give this handout to your pastor or church leaders to encourage them to do that. We invite you to do that, and this is on our free Voters Guide website. We'll put it up on our main website too, txvalues.org, so you can find out more about this information. But I think that was one of the things interesting about the president's speech. A lot of issues that people think are off limits, or you shouldn't talk about because they're not going to help in elections, they matter. They're incredibly relevant to people, and they touch people's personal and individual lives. And some of them, the one thing I mentioned about, about punishing prayer and tearing down crosses and muzzling preachers and pastors, these are references to recent things that government has tried to do to people of faith. They're not hypotheticals. And so we really salute the president for making everyone else aware of what many of us have been aware of. And I think it can help people feel more confident and say, you know what? Yeah, that's not right. The First Amendment protects these type of things. And that's clearly what we do at Texas Values at a state and a local level. And so just want to give you some feedback on that, but just a reminder of what the resources that we have, free resources we have like this. And if you need more backup on these issues, you need to talk to a member of our staff or reach out to our friends at First Liberty, we encourage you to do that. And so we agree. The state of our union is stronger than ever before, and that means we've got an opportunity in the state of Texas to give people encouragement, but also to remind them what's happening, what makes it strong. The economy, the religious freedom, the protection of life, all of those things give us that sense and that feeling of having that independence and protecting our own individual rights, but also having the government not punishing for some of those fundamental basic constitutional principles. And that's why a lot of people agree with what the president said last night on these issues. And so if you want to learn more about our work, go to txvalues.org. If you want to donate and support the nonprofit work we do as a 501c3 organization, we invite you to do that at txvalues.org, and we'll have some new updates soon from our social media channels.